What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Kilo Loco, and today we're going to be working with Flutter. So we're coming in at day 13 of hashtag 30 days of Flutter, and today we're going to be working with state management. The library we're going to be working with is going to be called Flutter BLoC, and this library is built to make it easier to scale your app up and continue to work with state management. Now, in the past, we've done state management directly in the actual view. So we would hang on to the state there in our view and then update the view based off of that. This actually allows us to extract the state out of our view and work directly with the state and the logic and build it out elsewhere. So that's actually what BLoC stands for, business logic component. So we're going to be working with that library, and specifically we're going to work with a sub piece of BLoC, and this piece is called Cubit. Now, there are a few differences between BLoC itself and then Cubit, but just all you really need to know is that Cubit is much easier to use and get started with, and then you can always graduate to using the whole entire BLoC pattern. So with all that said, let's go ahead and jump right on in. So as you can see, I already have a lot of stuff going on, and if you take a look at the app right over here, you can see that we're just simply showing an empty screen with our app bar up here. So in our main.dart file, you can see that we're creating state, and then the only thing that we're doing kind of differently right here is we have the material, we're returning the material app, but the home is going to be the post view. And that's because in the next tutorial, we're going to be going over a little bit more on navigation, and it makes sense to kind of start separating these different views from each other. So over here in our post view right here, you can see that we have the scaffold, and then this is the app bar and our text, right? Simple stuff. We also have the data service. Now, we covered this in the last video. If you're not familiar with doing networking requests, make sure you go check that video out. Really good stuff. We're going to be using a different API today. It's going to be called jsonplaceholder.typicode.com, and we're going to be using specifically the post endpoint. So let's head over to our browser so I can show you that. This is the website, jsonplaceholder.typicode. Great place if you want to do, you want to practice networking requests. And as you can see, there's really great documentation on how to use it, but specifically, we're going to be using this post endpoint. So when you click on it, you get to see the JSON. And as you can see, we have an array of objects. So these are an array of post objects. So over in our data service, you can see that we're going to set up our URI. We're going to make that request. We're going to get back some JSON. It's going to be a list, and we're going to cast that list into post. This is the post object. We don't really need to know anything about this process, but when you're getting started with state management, you're most likely going to want to use it with a networking request. And this is, I think, a pretty good example. So as you can see here, we're just simply returning future list of posts. Nothing crazy. So this is the part where BLoC comes in, because we need to have state management, right? We need to actually be able to get these posts, and then when we get these posts, we need to be able to update the state and make our view render some UI based off of that state. So if we go back over to our browser, and now if we go to Dart or pub.dev and we type in Flutter BLoC like so, you can see this bad boy right here. Oh, look at him. Look at him. Really clean. BLoC no K. They don't like the Kyles. So as you can see, we're going to be working with this specific example. Well, not this specific example, because the examples that they give are either overly complicated or they suck. It's just a counter app, right? So anyway, as you can see, we simply create some type of Cubit, right, which extends this Cubit object. And inside of this generic, we have to specify what our state is, like what type of object are we planning on dealing with. In our case, we're going to be actually doing a networking request, getting back a list of users. So that's going to be our state. It's going to be a list of users. So our Cubit is going to be wrapping a list of users, and we'll probably end up calling it, or a list of posts, I should say, a list of posts, and we'll probably end up calling it post Cubit, right? And then as you can see, we have this constructor, which we need to make sure we're calling super. We need to specify an initial value. So in our case, we're going to be working with no, like an empty array or an empty list. So we'll probably pass in an empty list. And then you have different functions that modify the state. So you can specify as many functions as you want. And what you'll do is you'll call emit, and emit will simply expect whatever the state type is. In this case, it's integer, but in our case, it's going to be a list of posts. So you can kind of see where these things are coming together. What we'll do is we'll start off with an empty list of posts. We'll go out, get those posts, and then we'll emit those posts, right? And then once we emit those posts, we should be observing the state of our qubit to render it onto screen. It's as simple as that. The docs here try to overcomplicate it. It's not that complicated. It's a simple topic. Don't need to actually go through most of those docs until you understand this example. So we're gonna kind of follow up from there, and we're gonna create our new file, and it's gonna be called post qubit. Oh, but before we do all that, let's make sure that we get this bad boy into our dependencies. So we need to go back over to that installings tab, grab that Flutter BLoC boy, and we need to go to our pubspec dot, you already know it, YAML, and we save it like so, and boom, we are good. So now I have this post qubit file, and I'll just simply make a new class called post qubit, like so, and it's going to extend our qubit. And what was the type that we're going to be working with for our state? Well, it's going to be a list of posts, right? All right, so we have our post qubit. It extends qubit list post. That's what we're working with. We need to create a constructor for it. So we're just going to have our post qubit, and we're going to initialize it. Then we need to call super. We need to specify the initial value of our state, and we're just going to give it an empty list. Simple as that. Then what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can get the post, right? So we call get post. We just, simple as this. This is going to be like a command. We're going to tell our qubit what we want to do, right? You can have as many commands in here as you want, as many functions in here as you want. They can manipulate the state however you want, right? You could have one like do get dummy post, get whatever post, get clear post. You know, you could do all these things and manipulate your state through these functions, and that's the entire point of qubit. You use functions to manipulate your state. So then what we'll do is we'll do emit, and then we're going to emit some type of list. Now right here, as you can see, I'm doing get post, and then I'm emitting just another empty array, empty list, and this is not what we want. What we have to do is we have to use our data service in order to get our post. So let's make our data service an actual property, or get an instance of our data service on our post qubit. All right, so we have our data service, and once again, as you can see, it's just this object that has this function on it, and this is an asynchronous function, so we're gonna have to wait for the result. But you won't see an object like this if you try to follow along on the documentation. Once again, they try to make it really hard for you to figure out how I mean, I don't think they're trying to do this, but they do it, right? They make it really hard because what they try to do is they try to break up this object that we have right here, this single object, into two different weirdly called objects. So what you would actually see is a client, and then you would have a repository, right? So the client would do like this piece, and then the repository would like do like this piece or something like that. And they break it up into two pieces because that's technically the right way to do it. You don't need to do all that. Just learn the basics of BLoC and Cubit first. Then you can go back, learn best practices all you want. You could break it up into a million different pieces. I don't care. All you need to know is that we have some type of object that gets our data and returns it to us, and we can create an instance of that object in our qubit itself to get that data back. So now what we want to do is we want to call await, and then we're going to access our data service, right? And we can do get post. And once again, this is not going to work because we need to mark it with async, right? And if this is confusing to you, I want to show you real quick what it looks like if we were to use the curly braces. I don't know if this is like too much for you, right? So you can just do emit like this. That'll perfectly work, right? You want to make sure that you return, I think. But overall, like all you have to do is this, and that's the same thing as our arrow functions, but it looks way cleaner, way sexier if we do it like this. So as you can see, whenever we call get post on our Cubit, we're going to have this asynchronous emit. We're going to wait for this await get post, and then we're going to emit that to our state. And the reason why this works is because this returns a list of posts, right? It's a future list, but our await turns it into just a list of posts, and our state is a list of posts. That's why it works. So now what we have to do is we have to modify how we access this information. And we have to first set it up so that we have a provider of this state so that we can actually work with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to head over to our main.dart file, and we need to change out our home. So our home is actually going to be a provider, and the provider is essentially what's going to allow us to access our state from almost anywhere in the app, but it has to be higher up in the chain, higher up in the widget tree in order for us to access it. So we need to be able to provide a context for our post Cubit, and we need to make this the child of that provider. So let's go ahead and do that right now, and I'll go back and explain it. All right, so as you can see, we wrapped our post view in a BLoC provider. This is going to give us, once again, the ability to work with our post Cubit further down the chain. Now, if you want to actually make it a little bit more specific, because you may end up working, or you're most likely going to end up working with a lot of different BLoC providers, what you could do is you can enter in post Cubit right here, and you can specify that the BLoC that you're going to be providing is specifically going to be this post Cubit BLoC, right? Because Cubit is like it extends BLoC. It's just like built over BLoC to make it much easier to interact with, because you only need to interact with it with functions. So once again, just a little bit easier. So the BLoC that we're going to be providing is this post Cubit. We need to create that post Cubit, and it gives us a context to do so. We don't need to use this. We can actually replace it with the underscore. That'll work too, but I'm gonna just do it how you're gonna probably see the documentation. We have our post Cubit being created right here, and then we need to specify which widget is going to be essentially nested in this BLoC provider, in which case we have post view. Now, if I go ahead and do a hot restart on the app, and we go back over to our simulator, nothing really has happened, right? It's kind of like an invisible widget that is wrapping our post view. You can't see any change. So where we're actually going to see the change is our ability to access our post Cubit state in our post view, which is the child, right? So that's why that's our child, because we're going to be accessing it here. Now, at the moment, we don't have any body for our scaffold. We ain't got no body, right? What we want to do is we're going to add a body to our scaffold, and that is going to be our BLoC builder. All right, so we have our BLoC builder, but our BLoC builder is a generic type, which means that we need to pass in the two different arguments that allow us to specify what type of BLoC builder this is. So first we need to specify what type of BLoC we're working with. In our case, it's going to be the post Cubit, right? What type of state is this post Cubit working with? What are we expecting to be working with when we get it back? Well, we're expecting to be working with a list of posts, right? So that's what we're expecting to work with. Now, since we have the type all specified, now we need to specify the builder. How do we actually build out this BLoC builder? So we pass in the builder function, and just like anytime that you see a builder, we're going to be working with a context, and then whatever type this is. Now, right now we have this nasty red squiggly because post is not imported. We got to make sure that's imported, but we have this as being the second argument in the builder, what's being passed into the function that we're going to see. So we're going to have a list of posts. So I'll call it posts, like that. From here, we're pretty much ready to go. All we need to do is build out our UI. So remember, we're going to start with an initial state of our post Cubit, and it's going to be an empty it's going to be an empty list, right? So we want to be able to handle both of those states, whether we have an empty list or if we have a populated list. If we have an empty list, let's just show a circular progress indicator. But if we do have posts, then what we can do is we could return a dynamic list view, and that will actually build out all the different posts. So let's add that in now. All right, so we have everything built out, right? We have our block builder, which takes in a post qubit and a list of posts. That means our builder is going to return a context and a list of posts for the second argument. Then what we're going to do is we're going to check, is our post empty? If it is, circular progress indicator. We still loading, baby. And then if we do have some posts in our array, then what we'll do is we'll return this list view builder, right? In which case we're given the context and the index. We can just wrap our list tile in a card so it looks big, sexy, right? And then the title will simply be a text, and then we'll get the specific post that we're working with, and we'll display that title of that post, right? So now let's run it again. Let's see what we get, right? And boom, we get that circular progress indicator, but where's our post, right? So the reason why we aren't getting our post yet, right, is because if we take a look at our post qubit, this was never called. Get post was never called. We're still waiting. So that means that our view, if I could find it up here, I don't know why I can't see, but our post is empty, therefore showing circular progress indicator. It's a tongue twister. So that's why we're still showing this. So then where do we call get post, right? Well, we do that back at the provider site. So that would mean in our main for this specific example. So for our child, we need to return back this post view, right? But what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're also calling get posts, right? So one way that we could do this is we could create an instance of the post view. We can get posts and then pass in the post view right here. But what I learned in the documentation is that there's this language feature called cascade, which you use the double dot. That means that you return the object, but on the instance of that object, you can access the properties and the methods of that object. So that means that we can do get posts like this, or no, hold on, not right here. We would actually do it over here. I'm sorry, it's on our post qubit. So we want to actually do a cascade right here, and we want to get posts right here. So it's going to be returning an instance of our post qubit, right? But on that same instance, we want to make sure that we're calling get posts. So like I said, you could wrap this in curly braces and build it out, create an instance of the post qubit, get the post, then return the post qubit. You could do it that way, or you could do it big sexy way right here. Use cascade, double dot, and now if we do this hot restart, we go back over here, we see it, and bam, bam. So that's all you really need to do. It's a very simple pattern. I try to explain it as simple as possible because it is not complex at all. All you need to do is have a state manager. It's going to be a qubit or a block. That's what we have our post qubit. You can create an instance of whatever type of object you want to use in order to get your data, whether it's locally, whether it's a networking request, however you want to get it, you just have an instance of that object. That object could do it however you want right here. Call it whatever you want. In the documentation, you're going to see clients, you're going to see repos. Be aware of that. Okay. You don't need to do it that way. You can call it data service if that makes more sense to you. It makes more sense to me. In the future, I'll change it to be repo, so that repository, so that we can be consistent. We could be, pros. Doesn't need to be though. Back over here in our qubit, we add in as many functions as we want to interact with the state and modify the data that we're working with, right? If I want it to, do a refresh, I just call this get post again, right? Pull to refresh, just call get post again, right? If I wanted to clear out the post, I add in a new function, set the emit back to an empty list. Simple as that. Then you need to go over to one of the highest areas that you're actually going to be expecting to use that qubit at. Add it in through a BLoC provider. BLoC provider takes in two different parameters. Create, it needs to actually know what type of block or qubit you're going to be working with. And then it takes a child. What widget do you want to show this in? And what is the child that is going to actually be using it? It could be way far down. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be directly this one. We could wrap this one in a center, right? And we could wrap it in the center again or something like that. And then we could still use this qubit on the children, or like the great grandchild of whatever the child is right here. So just keep that in mind. And then we have this cascading thing. If you need to do anything right away with this object, like get the post immediately, use this double sexy dot cascade right here. Get your post, and then if you take a look at your post view, much tighter, right? Nice and tight. Stateless widget. Only state that we're dealing with is provided by our BLoC provider, in which case we need to specify which block or qubit we're working with and what type we're expecting to work with. And you're done. So that's it. I hope that I was able to break this concept down into the most basic form. I couldn't figure this out all day just because they were trying to make it so much more complicated than it needed to be. But this is the way that I wish I could have learned it. And I hope that I was able to teach it to you in a way that was easy to remember. So if you have any comments on how I presented this topic, I would love to hear it. Did I do a bad job? Did I do a good job? This is supposed to be for beginners just getting started with BLoC, so keep that in mind. But hey, let me hear it. But that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I hope you learned something new. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure you subscribe. Now go out there and keep coding passionately.